Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And if you're just enjoying your Boxing Day lunch, then unfortunately, this might be the time where it might actually accidentally be brought up. So, I can't believe it, ladies and gentlemen. It's been 10 whole years um, since this happened, and I can't even believe that after all this time, it's still it's even more insane in retrospect because you can't really bring yourself to admit how mad all of this sounds. And to the people who don't really know what any of this is about, well, the story begins with the announcement of Sonic Boom. Yes, genuinely one of the worst video games ever released, and it's probably only like the second worst Sonic the Hedgehog video game in its long history. But the details are thus. That's not what triggered Chris. What triggered Chris is that Sonic the Hedgehog, outside of having a new red neckerchief around his neck, he also had blue arms this time instead of the traditional tan-coloured arms. This sent Chris into an absolute rampage regarding Sega to change Sonic's arms immediately, and Chris couldn't come to terms with calming himself down in any instance, and what this ultimately led to, following a series of rather depressive developments brought about by being lonesome this Christmas, it led to what is basically the Blue Arms incident. And before we get into the subject, ladies and gentlemen, not that it's 100% relevant, but it does make for some interesting reading, is that, you know what I was doing on the 26th of December 2014? I was with my auntie and my uncle and several of my cousins. We had sort of like a family get together, which is sort of the things you kind of like do during the holiday season. I know that maybe because Chris has sort of abstained himself from contact with any other members of his family, probably for the foreseeable now, the more I think about it. It's kind of interesting that Chris could have, I don't know, even rang up his auntie or uncle or somewhere like that, or had some sort of contact with other people, but I don't know, it's just sort of how things came to be. So let's get started, shall we? Ugh, I hate those people for continuing to allow the damn blue arms to exist, and I hate them for changing the arm colour in the first place, and ultimately from that damn seed event forced me to be attacked, having to defend myself, and forcing me to spend a weekend in jail. Chris's justification for the events that you'll see transpired. So let's get to it, shall we? Friday the 26th of December 2014 was one of the more eventful days of Chris's life. Certainly since graduating high school, essentially 28th of October 2011 all over again, the date found Chris in trouble with the law, once more for assaulting staff at a video game store, this time with pepper spray. He spent 3 whole nights in jail before being released on bail the following Monday. On the 15th of October 2015, he was finally found guilty of a misdemeanor charge and received a 6-month suspended sentence and a $541 fine. Now, I know immediately what you're thinking about, ladies and gentlemen. The American justice system not at work. After 10 months, all that Chris got was a 6-month suspended sentence and a $550 fine. That's what it came down to. Money that Chris didn't have to pay, let alone the bail he paid, if, reasons. But let's get into the whole story, shall we? Incident and jail stay. By the time of his arrest, Chris had already begun engaging in various acts of protest, mainly vandalism, in an attempt to force local retailers to stop selling Sonic Boom. This is, of course, by Chris's own admission, as we'll get into. In an attempt to force local retailers to stop selling Sonic Boom. As a result, he had already been banned from every GameStop within driving distance of his temporary home. Nevertheless, on the day after Christmas, while on a trip to Charlottesville Fashion Square, from which he had already been banned with his mother, Chris visited the GameStop outlet. It should also be worth noting this was the exact same GameStop that Chris won his Sonic Watch and Win sweepstakes all the way back in 92 or 93, somewhere like that. At the time, it probably might have been earlier again. At the time, the Boxing Day shift was in full swing, and the mall was crowded with people. The assistant manager just so happened to be on this shift when Chris arrived. While he claimed it was to purchase some Skylanders merchandise, it doesn't really matter what possessed him to go there. Staff said they already caught him vandalizing Sonic Boom merchandise and had banned him accordingly. They had been on the lookout for him, suggesting this wasn't the first time he tried to return after being banned. Furthermore, knowing Chris's penchant for lying unconvincingly, committing further acts of vandalism may indeed have been his real agenda that day. Whether the truth he entered the store wearing a pair of purple My Little Pony branded sunglasses designed for little girls, apparently as a disguise, naturally he still stuck out like a sore thumb. After arguing with staff, he strode towards the store entrance, commanding the staff, "Don't call anybody." Just before he left, he brandished a pink can of pepper spray and sprayed the assistant manager, or ass manager as Chris would later call him. The employee was later confirmed to be unharmed, though he did leave work after the incident. Most of the information on what happened in the next hour comes exclusively from leaked low-quality audio from a police scanner below, and many details are uncertain. With his duty at GameStop done, and the police on their way, Chris returned to his car and left the mall. At some point after arriving at the mall and checking JCPenney and Sears, police determined that Chris had been left the building around half an hour ago. The police talked with Barbara, and yes, Chris left without Barbara. You could call it abandonment, but there you are. Who was still in the mall eating, meaning Chris left his elderly mother behind without a car to go home. Barb had little information to offer except the make and colour of Chris's car. Chris was arrested on the same day at home. I think it was also mentioned that the police actually brought Barbara home and then arrested Chris. That's how they did. They took one windbag home and then arrested the other. On Sunday, the 28th of December, a member of Kiwi Farms contacted Albemarle Regional Jail and confirmed that Chris was being held there and was awaiting video court the next morning. A follow-up call from a 4chan troll revealed that the GameStop's assistant manager would be pressing charges. After his weekend in jail, Chris was charged with his Class 6 felony, posted the $2,500 bail, and released on recognizance. That's a word I've never really had to use before doing this, so there you are. I coined a new word. Now, it's this is just a transfer as far as like the police scanner was informed. It's not really required listening to, but it's just how these sorts of things go. Molozetai's account. The internet learned of the above drama when Tumblr user Molozetai uploaded an on-the-scene video. In the short clip, Chris, clad in full Tongo regalia, throws away any pity points he may have earned by macing a man who is clearly not threatening Chris in any way. It later became viral and one of the most viewed videos in Christory. Notably, Chris did not get nothing to get the video. Chris did nothing to get the video taken down, either because he was unsure of its existence or aware of the Streisand effect. After the video was discovered by Christorians at large on the 27th of December, Molozetai's inbox was flooded with questions on his recollection of the event. This is what he had to say. I was in GameStop looking at the 3DS racks when I heard a racket from my left. I looked up and saw Chris surrounded by 3 to 4 employees in a corner. I recognized Chris's voice before their appearance. A woman was telling Chris that they had been banned from the store and needed to leave, to which Chris responded with something like, "Oh, come on! Can't we just let bygones be bygones?" The employees ignored him and continued to tell him to leave and threatened to call security. Eventually, they dispersed to do so, which is when I began filming. I had been wondering whether or not I should, but I'd say only about 20 or so seconds had gone by between when I noticed and when I started filming. After the video, I heard employees complaining about the use of pepper spray. I didn't notice it when I initially filmed, nor was I ever in the vicinity of the spray, so I can't confirm anything. But as you can see, Chris sprayed something at the employee in the video. I don't remember seeing that employee around after that, so I assume he left. Anyway, a woman buying a game at the counter asked the employee she had been interacting with just what had happened, and that the employee replied that Chris was some guy that came in from time to mess with the Sonic Boom games because he was upset that Sonic's arms had changed colour, or something to that effect. Sadly, I did not check to see what happened to the Sonic Boom, and only stayed for another 5 minutes or so before leaving. But nothing else of interest happened other than employees running back and forth from the counter to the back room, anxiously talking about contacting security and making sure he was gone. And the video itself, well, is as you might suspect.
Don't call anybody.
Oh, it's your fan.
And that was the bar too.
I mean, I know it's not much, but yeah, that's basically the basis for everything that happened. Chris walks up, just sort of exchange glances, and, well, there you go. And this is just about the transaction. Now we hear from Chris's turn of events. I was the victim. Well, that should just tell you about everything you should know. Chris is meeting everyone's expectation. Yeah. Soon after his release from the pokey, Chris rushed to his keyboard to perform damage control. As you do. Not surprisingly, he refused to admit any fault. Bizarrely, while he claimed ignorance of the effects of pepper spray, he also admitted that he had sprayed himself with the stuff several days before the incident. He also tried to blame the store employees for intimidating him, even though the footage does not support this claim, and Sega for changing Sonic's arm color in the first place. Unlike his previous run-in with the law, where he was at least smart enough to only mention the exact details in a personal email to a close friend, Chris posted this to his Facebook page for all the world to see. Even as white knights condemned his actions, it seemed that this time around everyone was against him. Well, not against him, but more on the side of the law, wanting to be on the side of right, which Chris is almost never really on anymore, let's face it. Attention everyone! To preface what has happened recently, I simply remind everyone that Sonic the Hedgehog's arms are not freaking blue. If #Sega had never changed them, or reversed the change between February and November of this year in the new Sonic Boom video games and cartoon series on Cartoon Network, as well as the toys and whatever else, I would have never had to protest and rebel the way I have, including the creation of my group, Fix Sonic's Arms Immediately, Sega! Within my groups, I have led by example to push forward to the path of waking Sega up and forcing them to change Sonic's arms color back to blue, immediately. And to confess, I have done my part for real. I had personally gone into 3 of the 4 local GameStops, excluding the Fashion Square one, 3 times to personally protest in my silent way. First attack. I printed, as seen in the Facebook group, the fronts of the Sonic Boom game inserts affixed with double-sided tape onto the backs and asphyxiated them onto the fronts of their respective display game boxes on the shelves. Second attack. About a week later, I checked the success of my first attack. I damaged a few original inserts pretty well to full removal, and of what was still there. I made attempts to transfer the inserts from the original cases into behind the inserts of different games. I've had to briefly explain my reasons and the protest and them that they should not be selling any of the Blue Arm Bandit games in the first place, and that they should send all of their remaining stock of Sonic Boom games and stuff back to Sega to make them change Sonic's arm color back to blue immediately. They did nothing. And one last week later, the third and final attack, and the one and only time the Fashion Square location had been involved as well. I had made up and printed full price tag decals with a short note to discourage purchase of the Blue Arm Bandit games, and promote the protesting boycott. And with the 5 Wii U software cases that each melted a bit from my house fire last January, as well as the 5 smoke-damaged 3DS game cases, no melting, I had printed a full front, side and back insert with the boycott encouragements and the notes on the back to make the stores send their remaining stock back to Sega. I have ran into individuals giving me bad grief for my protests and actions outside from the Fashion Square location, but I have done my duty in full to the best of my abilities at the individual moments and circumstances. I also had hidden all of the Blue Arms Sonic toys at Toys R Us here, concealed hidden amongst their metal cupboards, so they would all not be sold, and best boycotted for the protest. They remained hidden for the longest time of over a month, found and reshelved nearly the 20th of December to my personal dismay and crestfall, and at Best Buy, all copies of their Sonic Boom games are still successfully concealed and hidden for view and purchase. Anyhow, after the final attack for the protest, nearly a week later, on December 8th, I had typed, signed, addressed, and US mailed apology letters with a promise to have done with my in-person protest deeds with no further action therein, to all but the Fashion Square GameStop, and I had sent one to Toys R Us as well. I had thought the FSGS would overlook the one attack of protest on them, but obviously I was mistaken. Which brings us up to now. Last Friday, the 26th, my mother and I were at the mall, getting pizza and spaghetti for lunch. She had informed me of a good mini refrigerator deal at Sears, so after eating, I made my way back to check it out. Nothing else happened at Sears, and I went nowhere near JCPenney that day. There was a good 3-to-1 cubic foot fridge for $129.99 that caught my eye, but that is to be purchased later. On the way to Sears, I peeked into the GameStop, and I spotted new Skylander figure Blastermind. I was set to buy it, and I was going to consider checking out their Wii U pre-owned software selection in their 3-for-2 deal. Innocent, I was not looking for trouble, but then this male loomed out of me and frightened the crap out of me, and then he said in a booming voice that only scared me worse, "You are banned from here. You need to leave now." But still determined to continue my shopping, I veered into the Wii U direction, when his female accomplice startled me and boomed in as well. Still feeling frightened and mentally overloaded, I made a grab for my pepper spray to use in defense. I offered a few peaceful solutions, but she ended up sending him to go get security, so I shouted, "Fine, I'm leaving," and I dropped the figure, and on my way out, I told the male not to get anyone, and we both stopped near simultaneous. I still felt my own worst for wear with the fear, startle, paranoia, and I did not want him following me and causing more trouble upon me. And then in my defense, and to make my escape, I spritzed a minuscule amount of the pepper spray downward, not into his face, and then I left. I did not learn until much later that the spritz had done a lot worse than I imagined it would, as well as learning that there were the so-called manager and ass manager of that particular store. I had no idea of the contents of the pepper spray, or that it was illegal for you to use in certain situations in the state of Virginia at all. And I had tried the stuff on myself days before in the upstairs bathroom, a 2-second spray onto my left wrist. Some of it got onto the bathtub as well. Like sampling a perfume or deodorant, it took me out damn well. I had to open the windows, turn on the bathroom fan, and aim the box fan into the bathroom to air the place out. And I wiped the wall off as well. And of course, I washed my hands. It took 15 to 30 minutes to make it bearable in there again. In the end, yes, I went along peacefully when the police arrived to collect me, and I had to spend a miserable weekend in jail, and I just got out on a bond and bail, yada yada yada. In the end, I was the victim. I did not cause the original provoking. The assistant manager made the first attack onto me and provoked my defensive response. I was minding my own business, not looking for trouble, and then he startled me, similar to a potential R-word in a dark alley in a big city. Any of you would have done the same as I have in defense and escape. And we can sue Sega for changing Sonic's arm color and, ultimately, this male getting pepper sprayed. Think about it seriously. And my protest actions are not acts of vandalism. Regardless of your individual perceptions, it was not vandalism, but good protest when in around 2004 at Fashion Square, I tried their new soda machines with a credit debit card slot, and then I learned of the $5 surcharge that brought my bank account into the freaking red. I subtly posted sticky note signs onto each machine shortly after. This machine charges you $5 per card use. A few days later, the original machines returned. Nobody gave me any freaking grief or complaints at it at all. And if you really want me to see the whole mess happen, go find the security tape of that time of point A, my finding Blastermind to point B, of my departure from the store. Now, if you will excuse me, I have a lot of much required packing to take care of. Good day. I don't remember necessarily if it was Kenneth Engelhardt or William Elliott Waterman, then literally posted down below, and the context was about both of those one of those two pleading for Chris to understand that Chris had entered a store in which he had been banned, and because Chris refused to leave immediately, or the fact that Chris stepped onto their property in the first place, it was considered an act of trespassing, and Chris should know that and not even be surprised when this sort of thing happens because of what Chris had done, or even that Chris could face jail time for involuntary release of dangerous gas. And as mentioned before, nobody was particularly that sympathetic towards Chris, as they shouldn't be. The charges. According to Albemarle General District Court, this was the case. Charge: dangerous gas unlawful release, Penal Code 18.2-312. Illegal use of tear gas, phosgene, and other gases. If any person maliciously release or cause or procure to be released in any private home, place, or business of place, or of public gathering, any tear gas, mustard gas, phosphine gas, or other noxious or nauseating gases or mixtures of chemicals designed to, and capable of, producing vile or injurious or nauseating odors or gases, and bodily injury results to any person from such gas or odor, the offending person shall be committing a Class 3 felony. If such act can be done unlawfully but not maliciously, the offending person shall be guilty of a Class 6 felony. For a Class 6 felony conviction, Virginia sentencing guidelines recommended 1 to 5 years in prison and a fine of up to $2,500, in addition to all of the other corresponding losses he'd experienced as a registered felon. The 6th degree version under the Virginia tear gas law is for cases in which the tear gassing was done unlawfully but not maliciously. Chris was fortunate to avoid the Class 3 felony version of the charge, which deals with malicious intent, and carries a much stiffer penalty of 5 to 20 years in prison and up to a fine of $100,000. The law allowed Chris to plead down to misdemeanor level assault and battery and be given a suspended sentence. If not, he probably would have been at least 15 years in prison, with probation, counselling, anger management, and /or community service in lieu of jail time. Ultimately, this is essentially how it turned out. Having squandered Bob's inheritance on hiring Rob Bell after the 28th of October 2011 incident, Chris was forced this time around to work with a public defender. Chris returns to the front. As you do. On the 3rd of January 2015, an email leaked onto Kiwi Farms exposed that Chris had behaved in a bellicose manner at Walmart on that date and threatened to use his mace again. So, all this about Chris being the victim didn't wash in the first place, but now it really doesn't wash because he literally threatens to do it again. This was soon afterwards confirmed by Chris himself. See, there you go. Who indicated that he wielded the pepper spray because it made him feel like a badass. The statement worried many onlookers as it suggests that Chris perceived himself as invincible so long as he could issue credible threats. It was seen as a disturbing indicator that Chris's notion of his invincibility and invulnerability, previously confined to the comics, had seeped into his conscious psyche. On the 11th of January, Chris posted the following to his Facebook account. once again painting himself as the victim and wishing that people would like him. Despite his past actions, he argued that nobody should be banned from the store unless they are carrying a gun. The post also addresses the completely unrelated issue regarding Chris's sexual identity and frustration that he has not addressed by feminine pronouns, which he had only just started to use. Just listen. Do not comment or respond. I am being very serious. I really wish people would positively like me. I cannot make people like me, and if they dislike me for their own individual reasons beyond my own comprehension, I can not change their minds. But to my utmost dismay and sadness, should I be threatened or made to feel threatened, I will defend myself to force some respect from them. All I would ever want is a good day and some peace of my own mind. I do not intend, nor have ever intended, unprovoked to offend anyone. And if my good day is turned bad because of me feeling threatened by anyone, then I feel those individuals immediately deserve to have a bad day themselves, and continue living on from there. Then it is their fault for pushing me into the defensive position in the first place. It really does make me feel sad and most disappointed of the other people when they give me such grief to the point that I have to be put into a position to force some respect out of them. That's called sociopathy if I've ever seen it. And I have been growing more paranoid of other people since November of 2007, with the damn bad people over the internet, as well as those I have had the displeasure to have encountered in person who have shown me nothing but a difficult time and even more grief. Also, I sincerely believe nothing would ever be gained from killing anyone, including myself. All that does is forces one onto the other into their next realm or life. Nobody really learns or really benefits from anything from the deaths of any person. That is why I would never or I would ever own a real gun. Look out, she's going after her mace. What, would you rather have a gun with bullets in it? And that is another thing everyone should be aware of. I am a female soul, and I prefer to be referred to by the female pronouns. Any addresses of sir or man upon me will only be met with a cold shoulder or stare in their general direction. And nobody should ever be banned from a high-volume store like Walmart or Target for anything less offensive than a gun withdrawal or robbery. We all have had bad days, and unless we actually hit a person or living individually or similar actions in how we individually react to how we are feeling at the one moment, aside from the other individual moments, to ban an individual is just plain wrong. And acts of protests with just meanings do not deserve any damn grief either. Just let me live on in peace, let me enjoy my good day and pleasant shoppings and outings, and do not bother me at all. I have had no intention whatsoever to harm anyone, individual, person, or myself. So please, do not give me reason to be forced to defend myself to garner any respect. All that does is give us all a bad day from a good one. Good day. I think somebody else also made a comment about why did Chris feel offended and that Chris should seek counselling. As a response, Chris said, and I quote, "You are being unfriendly to me and a meanie. I hope your house burns down with you and your jerk boyfriend living inside. Good day." Take that for what you will, but I don't really feel as if giving Chris genuine advice. I think that counts as being bad as well, apparently. Subsequent court hearings. Chris had 7 hearings related to this case, stretching into the autumn of 2015, but finally received a conviction. His fans were frustrated at the slow pace of justice. 29th of December hearing. At the video hearing on Monday, the 29th of December, which only consisted of the judge setting bail/bond conditions and a date for the next hearing, Chris was released on bond. The following month, he revealed in a Facebook post that, in yet another development mirroring the 28th of October 2011, the judge had placed a no-contact order on Chris as part of his bail conditions. 5th of February hearing. His next hearing took place on the 5th of February. It was decidedly brief as the Chandlers appeared to have been assigned an unsuitable representative, and another hearing in April was scheduled. According to 2 Virginian Christorians in attendance, little of note happened except Chris and Bob forgetting the date of the next hearing, and thereby pissing off the court by holding up the next case. Footage was taken of Chris and Bob leaving court. The first appearance Bob has made in historical media for almost 2 years. Eyewitness account. I sat in the back of the courtroom, since I was trying really hard to be inconspicuous, but as a result of that, it was hard for me to hear much of anything. I can't give you much in the way of specific dialogue. Ramspieler, at least the person I believe was him, has a better vantage point, so expect more from him there. Anyway, Chris was wearing women's clothing, but it didn't look like as much of a disaster as usual. He was wearing a black cardigan and long dark blue skirt with white stripes, along with dark blue leggings and a pair of tan boots. His hair still looked pretty terrible, much the same as it was in the mugshot. Bob was with him, wearing what looked like a red wool coat. Chris looked pretty nervous while I was waiting for things to get started. He was fidgeting a lot and kept leaning over to ask her questions. I'm pretty sure I heard him ask, "Do you think we should tell him about our troll problems?" Once, which made me smile inside. They called Chris up pretty quickly. His case was one of the first ones to go through. Naturally, even though there were 2 or 3 female PDs in the courtroom, Chris got the one brute male of the lot. He was summoned as Mr. Chandler, which I doubt he liked very much. I heard the PD make a brief comment about Chris's appearance, but didn't hear exactly what was said. The PD, Chris, and the judge spoke with each other for about 2 minutes, and eventually the ruling was for a continuation on April 2nd. The 2 of them left the courtroom, only to come back in a minute or 2 later, with Chris chiding his mother. "What were you thinking, Barbara Ann?" I guess Barbara had already forgotten the date of the next hearing, or maybe she thought they needed to come back later in the day or something. Anyway, she and Chris spoke to the PD for another minute or 2. I heard the PD say this to them. I said, "You're free to go." "Yes, it's April 2nd. April 2nd. I can write that down for you if you want." He looked just a little annoyed because even this short exchange was enough to hold things up. Chris and Bob were blocking the middle of the courtroom while this was happening, and the judge had to ask them to move out of the way so the next guy could get through. The 2 of them left a little while later. All Chris had to say on his way out was, "Welp," accompanied by a stressed sigh. Ramspieler's write-up. Despite the continuance of the case until April 2nd, I am glad to have been there and have been in presence of the man-baby and Bob themselves. I wish I was a better videographer/photographer and had taken better shots of them. All I got was a video of them leaving court as well as the video of 14 Branch Lane Court. I'm also glad that Zionista posted and filled in for the details I wasn't able to pick up on. But the truth is that there is a very active courtroom and everybody was moving around and whispering to each other, so it is possible that I may have misheard some things. Anyway, I got there at like 8:50, and after taking off my studded belt and fishing keys out of my pocket to pass the metal detector, I finally sat myself down in the courtroom, but still no sign of Chris. In fact, I was almost expecting him to be a no-show. I started jotting down my notes and everything when I look up, wondering if he wasn't coming. When I hear close to me a very familiar voice, I look to my right, and sitting in the bench in front of me and the very end of it, I saw him. My face just lit up, and I knew right then and then that the trip was worth it. This is the closest thing I'll ever experience to having met a movie star, is basically my sentiment. And right in front of me was a woman who, at first, I thought was either his attorney or even Rocky Shoemaker. I was wondering whom she was the longest time, until his PD showed up and asked to speak with her son, so confirmed Snorlax. Also, he didn't seem to be too pleased with the PD referring to him as male. I can confirm Zionista saw and heard, and indeed he was in full Tongo attire, ridiculous blue eyeshadow and all. Bob's red overcoat was covered in animal fur, so I guess they must have pets. I can also confirm his constant sighing and nervousness. He couldn't stop shaking his leg. He also bore the same expression that he has been wearing for his mugshot. He was obviously stressed and displeased. There was even a moment where he kinda turned around and looked at me in what seemed to be suspicion. Was I that obvious? The guy with the full vintage Star Wars Episode 4 Hong Kong movie poster shirt and the notepad, writing down everything. Like I said, it was a relatively noisy courtroom, so I couldn't catch the gist of most of the whispering, but I did catch him asking Bob and the PD and the judge should be made aware of the troll problem. Like Zionista, I couldn't help but smile, but he then went on in what seemed to be a rant about misogyny and misogynists. I guess he was hoping that the male judge wouldn't be such. What really caught my attention was the way they carried on. If you don't know, they were mother and son. You could swear that they looked like a real creepy cougar/cub romantic relationship. The way they held each other's backs to him telling her, "I love you," I was also able to notice that he was wearing a graduation ring, I guess from his high school. I couldn't make out the letters, but the stone was purple. He then said something about hoping that he wasn't a chicken, and Bob replied that he won't be. I guess they were talking about the lawyer. Speaking of, the PD was this handsome, lean dude in his mid to late 20s. Had curly hair and a trimmed beard. If you took off his suit and left his glasses on, he would look like a great hipster at some microbrewery. The reason why I, at first, assumed that they hired him was because I noticed Chris's Lego notebook, a business card with a written phone number and the name of what looked like to be Max Ripioli. I knew it was Italian, and the judge did utter a similar surname when telling Chris that said person couldn't defend him. The first name was definitely Max, though. Bob's advice for Chris when in the stand was to stand up straight and smile. Anyway, once the judge granted the continuance, I took that as a cue to my leave and stand by to take visuals. So when I was outside turning my phone on and trying to get the camera to work was when Zionista witnessed what took place after I left before they left. And even though it's not the most required, it's just to show probably need to scroll down a little bit further than this. There we go. Anyway, the 2nd of April hearing. Chris began to attend his hearings alone, and reportedly seemed more nervous than in the last hearing. It began 20 minutes early and was over within minutes. In fact, Chris left the courtroom before custodians made it through security, so no one knows what, if anything, actually happened inside. What is known is that Chris was granted another continuance, and the next hearing was scheduled for the 7th of May. The account from forum member Lipitor. We got down here, took some pics of historical locations, those will come later. So we're heading to the courthouse and decide to stop at McDonald's. On the way, not the Ruckersville one across the Walmart because it was the 29 towards Seaville. As we pull in, we see a blue Ford Focus with the license plate Sonotube brand, newish too. Probably nicer than my car. It totally looked like more like a Decepticon than an Autobot, just for the record. My bud decides, well, guess I'm going in for a coffee. I stayed in the car. I'll let him tell you what he saw in there. I was sitting in my car when he comes out. He was wearing those stupid My Little Pony sunglasses, carrying 2 cups of coffee. He had a black cardigan thing on, I think, but then was more noticeable when with his striped dress. It looked like someone stole the curtains from a freshman girl's dorm room and sewn it together haphazardly. It gave him noticeable trouble while walking. He was wearing the some type of lace-up boots that were sort of high heels, but not really. Probably didn't help with the walking. But he didn't seem to realize that in a dress his gait couldn't stride as wide and kept almost falling over and stumbling when his feet landed. Bob was strangely absent. He messed around his car and went for the trunk. He pulled out one of those things for wiping your windshield. Looked like stolen from a gas station. I don't think he did anything with it. It just took it out and fumbled with it, and then put it back. Hey, Jackie Pie came out just as he was getting back in the car. We tried to lose him, but ended up taking turns following each other. Chris swerved out of the way of a crow in the street without looking into the other lane. We just drove up to the crow like normal people, and it flew away last minute, like they always do. We tried to lose him continually, or at least try to trail or get ahead of him, but we were like right next to each other all the time. We took a wrong turn and lost him. We found a spot where you were actually allowed to park near the courthouse. See Hey Jackie Pie's comment if you want to get that joke. He parked in nearly the same spot he did last time. He just sat there in his car. Seemed like he was playing a game on his phone or some shit. He sat there for nearly 30 minutes. We wanted to go in after him, so we just waited in front of the door. From behind me, I hear a string of like 9 stress sighs in a row. I turned around to see him. He had removed the MLP glasses and wore his normal ones now. Could see he was wearing nearly the same tights he did last time. We gave it a minute so he could go in and sit down. We go in there and he's just standing there at the metal detector. He has so much jewelry to remove. Like bracelets and necklaces, it took forever for him to get them off. The clerk at the metal detector rolled his eyes at him while he was doing it. After he got done, he just sat down in a chair in front of the courtroom, but not in it. He was stress sighing and looking around nervously. God, he really does stress sigh a lot. He looks like a teenager who's trying out an outlandish style for attention, but not totally confident in it or aware of what style it is. Anyway, we finally got up and went in and went through the metal detectors. By the time we got through, I had just opened the courtroom door. He was coming back out and we almost bumped into each other. He said apologetically, "Well, got that one out the way quick," and dashed out of the door to the courtroom. This was like 30 minutes before his hearing, so we didn't know what to make of it. He had noticed us, so we didn't know if he was trying to dodge us or what. So we just sat down and boring court stuff happened for like 10 minutes or so. We ended up leaving because it was clear he wasn't coming back. We saw he was still in the car. We walked around the building once and he was gone. We went back to see if anything would be said about him, but they said nothing. Must have been a continuance. Chris is definitely not going to have an outburst this time though, guys. He's super nervous. Maybe that's just because Bob wasn't there. I don't know. I'm not even sure really at this point if it's like even worth going into like the other accounts of this, because for the most part, it's mostly just kind of the same, I guess. Well, okay, so we'll just do with one count hearing it. Well, going forward. So, I mean, there's plenty still more to go through. The 7th of May hearing. True to the predictions of many, this hearing resulted in another continuance until the 11th of June. It lasted longer than the previous one. Chris was once again spied at McDonald's before the hearing, former member Lipitor's account. Maybe you've seen the picture, maybe you haven't, but Chris's courtroom outfit was absolutely ridiculous. It was a Girl Scout green/teal colour and cut worn over a white t-shirt. The cut was just above the knees. Christian wore dirty old sneakers with old gym socks with it. He also had a matching hat, and that was the same colour as his dress. It looked like something an old lady would wear to church. You could tell by his face that he thought he looked cute as shit while wearing that hat, but he looked like a moron. He didn't wear it inside the courthouse, even though women are allowed to wear hats inside. The inside the courthouse is sort of set up like an old Catholic church with pew seating. Christian sat near the front with his back to the side wall so he could scope everyone in there out. Saw him lock eyes on some dude and pull his phone out and text someone. More on that later. Or more on who later. You're not allowed to have phones with cameras, so he did have a flip phone with him. It took hours for them to finally get to his case. When they finally did he was very nervous. They kept calling him by both male and female pronouns at different times. They called him Chris, Christian, Christine, and a couple of times Crystal. I know Christine is his daughter, but apparently the judge accidentally called him that a few times, and I was in no position to correct the man. Christian didn't seem fazed by any of this and went with whatever name/pronoun used at the time. They talked forever, and it was mostly just establishing what happened and what the charge was. So it was hard to hear. So the next part is a bit speculative. It sounded like the reason for the continuance was because they wanted Christian to see a shrink/counselor/whatever so they could do a mental health plea. They wanted him to go right after the court too. He seemed to agree to this at the time. Like I said, I couldn't hear the exact details of what was going on, so it might be a bit different. Feel free to spurg out all the others about what that means. Here's the best part. On the way out, my field agent was confronted by some lady. She asked the field agent what they were doing there and what their name was. She said she was a reporter. My field agent was like, "Yeah, I'm not telling you that." She shifted tone and said she just wanted to buy my field agent a cup of coffee and hear his story. Stupid. She wanted to know why a community of people on the internet, without literally documenting everything in his life, an interview was declined. The 11th of June hearing. This hearing was also quickly continued until the 23rd of July. The custodian in attendance described Chris as uncharacteristically sociable and collected. Perhaps because of his forays at the Impulse Gay Social Club have made him more comfortable around people. I attended the court hearing this morning. Chris's hearing was to begin at 9:30. The courthouse opened for business at 9. I got there at 9:05, sat down and realized Chris was already in the room, sitting across from me. Let me proffer the opinion that Chris passes as a woman. An ugly, frowsy, dumpy, old-fashioned, middle-aged woman to be sure, but there are many women like this, so therefore Chris passes. In a public setting like the courtroom, where you don't give people a close inspection, there would be no reason not to assume that the lump sitting over there was a woman. The 5 o'clock shadow is easily visible from a distance, which would be your first clue that something was unusual. He was wearing an aqua blue outfit with matching eyeshadow, blue sweater, blue collared blouse with vertical stripes, blue skirt with vertical stripes, dark stockings. Everything matched well except for his grotty sneakers, which are blue but the wrong shade. He shouldn't have been wearing sneakers anyhow with this outfit. He had this typical ugly dark nail polish, 2 rings on his right hand, and some kind of multicolored bracelet on his left wrist. He had a headband, and his hair looked the way it has in all his recent photos. He wore his glasses. He had his black purse with all the jangly stuff hanging off it. He was reading something. I couldn't tell what it was at first, but then he stood up and it turned out to be the issue of Vanity Fair with Mrs. Kathleen Jenner on the cover. He used his index finger to help him read. Chris has a weird body type. He's pudgy, but his forearms and ankles are really skinny, so the weight gathers in the center of his body. He looks kind of like Mr. Peanut. His breasts are as small as ever, and there was zero evidence of gains. When I first arrived, there was a middle-aged woman sitting next to him. I assumed she was his public defender, but as soon as the judge arrived, at the same time I did, she went up to speak with the judge and left the room. Before she left, Chris said to her, "I'm Christine, by the way." The woman introduced herself to Chris and said goodbye, so Chris had apparently initiated small talk. A few minutes later, Chris did a little hand wave to a female lawyer who walked in, who returned the wave. He seemed to be checking out every woman who entered the courtroom. The judge stuck around for just a few minutes and left again. A cop went around to the room to ask everyone, "Are you set for 9:30? When she asked Chris, he said, "Huh?" She repeated the question and Chris said, "Yeah, I believe so." The courtroom is small, and as other field agents had mentioned, the mood is relaxed and casual. All as much as it can be with 7 jerk cops hanging around and 3 guys in the front row with manacled ankles and wrists. The judge is a black woman. She handled one case regarding probation violation before 9:30, which was done very casually and informally, while the other lawyer folk had quiet chats and shot the breeze with the sheriffs. For the most part, everyone just sat around. The main reason why I made the last minute decision to attend was that he's been enraged about the new Blom's game, and that I was hoping he'd show up with a sign demanding justice for transsexuals or something equally dramatic. Chris's mood was entirely the opposite. He was self-contained, calm and collected. He was not angry, stressed or nervous. He was not fidgety. It was very hard to believe that this was the person who just the day before had expressed a public wish to beat up Sega executives. He sat and read his magazine. At one point, something he was reading caught his attention, and he said, suddenly causing the woman sitting next to him, a different one, to turn her head to look at him. He seemed somewhat bored. He yawned twice, loudly, putting his hand over his mouth, which struck me as rather self-indulgent and overdramatic. Around 9:40, a couple of quiet cases, they called Christian Chandler. At this point, the lawyer who had defended the probation violator walked over to Chris and escorted him to the front, revealing himself as the public defender. He is young, skinny, bearded, wore tweed. He seems like a good guy, pretty relaxed. He looks like he knows his way around a college debate tournament. Right then, 3 lawyers decided to sit down right in front of me and hold a conference, making it difficult to hear what was said. It was apparent that the first words of the judge's mouth was that there was a continuance. Chris asked a question. The judge said it would be dealt with at the next hearing, and that he should stay in touch with his lawyer. Chris said that the lawyer wore big, patronizing smiles. They treated him like a sensitive child. Their attitude was, everyone is your friend, no one wants to attack you. In the previous probation case, the judge was serious and all business. Because she was speaking with an adult here, even though macing someone is also pretty serious business, she was also dealing with a special individual, and it was pointless to deal with him normally. So Chris has basically already won over the judge. I predict that, for better or worse, he will receive psychological treatment and very little punishment. Chris's attorney walked him out of the courtroom, and I followed them out. They hung out at the front porch for about a minute to cover some issues. He told Chris that for the next hearing, be a little early like you were today. Another lawyer, a pretty young woman, joined them, and she too was all smiles. Chris complimented her clothing, and she replied, I like your colour too. Then Chris walked the 100 feet to the curb, and I realized that Sonshu was sitting right there, shiny and new and as blue as Sonic's arms. Since there was some controversy earlier, let me clarify that Chris is not parking illegally. The handicapped spot is adjacent to the judge's spot, and the sign is clearly marked. Chris is legally allowed to park in the handicapped spot because of his autism. I had to pay $5 to park at a garage 2 blocks away. He sat in his car for about a minute and then drove off. For me, the most remarkable thing this time was how much progress has made in getting over his social anxiety. He was very eager to initiate contact with any pretty woman he saw. I think it's something he should be proud of. He's not the same guy who would post a sign on the wall because of his noviophobia. This is actually a proven method for overcoming social anxiety. The more experience you have in talking to strangers, the easier it becomes. Of course, none of this will help him find a sweetheart, because while Chris is friendly, he's also immediately off-putting. He's instantly recognizable as a weirdo. 23rd of July hearing. Another continuance. Until the 15th of October, although this Christorian in attendance noted something was said about going to a therapist. Aside from this, he noted that Chris farted very loudly and wetly in the middle of court, accompanied by that signature sigh. Unlike the 3 previous hearings, which Chris attended alone, Bob and a middle-aged woman thought to be Rocky there was also there. The Christorian who also was harassed by an unidentified woman in red who tried to prevent him from filming Chris and Bob outside, where he had every right to do so, asked about his behaviour. The Christorian also revealed that he had been notified Chris thought the Christorian had been arrested. Yeah, we have no idea who this is, and that's just sort of how it is. And finally, the 15th of October hearing. The real deal. Chris was found guilty, as many had foreseen. However, he was let off lightly. The Class 6 felony charge of dangerous gas unlawful release was amended to a charge of assault/misdemeanor, and he was fined a charge of $541 and received a suspended sentence of 180 days, a sentence he'll only have to serve if he runs afoul of the law during his probation period. The terms of his probation were not clear. Chris sighed profusely as terms were discussed. Bob showed up this time. The field report from the man in the pickle suit. Bob's aging, thin, kind of frail, might not be very responsive. In retrospect, I don't think Chris recognized anyone. There was the guy he exchanged words with, but going over my notes, it might have just him being paranoid of someone. There was an old lady behind Chris, talking to him a few times. I don't think it was Rocky. Chris's outfit, from what I could see, was very funny. Ramspieler might have a picture. Bob and Chris, who are way too physically intimate. It's one thing to describe their creepy relationship, it's quite another to watch it IRL. They hold hands, and Chris is always putting his arm around her and rubbing her shoulders sensuously. That's shit I'd do to someone I want to bang, not a family member. It's weird. There was some guy with white hair and a white suit talking to not Rocky. Then the PD came over and talked to Chris and Bob, with white hair guy and not Rocky in the row behind them. This is why I heard snippets referencing 6 months and something. I think I heard Chris stress sigh a few times, and I think the PD got a little annoyed dealing with Chris. Not much, but I kinda sensed something like that. Maybe I imagined it. After a bit, the PD went up to the judge and they called Chris up. Chris starts getting impatient with Bob. He said something like, "Are your ears clogged up?" And they then want to follow me up so you can hear what's going on. Then she got up and turned up there to accompany Chris. This says a few things to me. Perhaps Bob's hearing is wearing down. This fits in with her being frail and old. Chris is being kind of bossy to Bob, and Chris expects Bob to be his bookkeeper as far as punishments go. This is confirming what we heard about the Snyder trial. Now, I couldn't hear anything that was saying up front. At this point, I didn't want to get hassled by not Rocky or whoever else there, so I bailed and went to find Ramspieler. Field Agent Ramspieler released a video of Chris and Bob leave the courthouse. Well, basically that's Chris saved by his autism, you may say, but, well, there you are. 6 months suspended sentence and a $541 fine. That's seemingly sort of where... You see, I would say that's kind of where the story ends, except it kind of doesn't yet. Epilogue. Chris's probation expired on the 11th of April 2016, and he paid his court costs of $541 on July 1st of that year. A year after his assault crime, Chris commented on the group embargo on GameStop, Best Buy, and Simon shopping centers. He claimed to be remorseful of what he had done and implored GameStop and Fashion Square to unban him. He then followed up on his apology by threatening to accuse them of discriminating against a high-functioning autistic, lesbian trans woman, famous author with headache-inducing mental handicaps. Furthermore, he threatened to report the employee he had maced to the Better Business Bureau on suspicion that he had been holding a job at both GameStop and Best Buy. Needless to say, Chris's bans were not overturned. As for the mace, Chris claimed that he had emptied the thing of pepper spray down into a nearby hole, big hole outside, and disposed of said canister into the hole. So now Chris is just littering now, I guess. In the Internet Dream Lounge interview, Chris made a few comments on the event and the protests in general, remarking that he regretted it. Giving his ego, Chris unsurprisingly worded his description of the event as "someone ended up getting maced," and indicated that he was mostly irritated by being banned from the stores. Yeah, well, as you can suspect, and of course, as is literally the case whenever it comes to Chris, as we all know, it's just paramount at this point, through all the references, all the incidents, is that Chris went through nearly an entire year of stress and the fear of facing jail time, all because Chris didn't like the fact that a fictional character's arms had been changed to blue. Insane as this all sounded, But this is not even. This is okay. So this may not be the tip of the iceberg, but it's like just above the surface level, because, well, who does this? That's the question I'm still asking myself. And even 10 years later, who does this? Nobody. That's who. But with all that being said and done, there you are. There's no real grand conclusion to this whole story apart from, don't do this, guys. Please. You're going to be saving yourself a lot of trouble and maybe a bit of cash here and there if you don't do this. So, I don't really know who I needed to tell apart from you guys, I guess. But there you are. Enjoy the rest of Boxing Day, and I'll be glad to see all of you guys again in the next video. So take care and enjoy the rest of your Boxing Day. And to the team working at the GameStop that Chris had trespassed, shout out to them as well for dealing with Chris.